Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our last session of Employment and Transition webinar. Today's session, why employment first must be a priority in Arizona. Hello. So thank you for joining us. I am Natalie Luna Rose. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law, where I provide strategic leadership and direction on community outreach and engagement. I also manage our public relations and outreach initiatives. Just a little bit about myself. Previously, I served as press secretary for Congressman Raul Grijalva. And last year, in 2020, I was elected to the governing board of the Tucson Unified School District. I'm a native Tucsonan and a proud mother of my daughter, Lily, who just started her freshman year in high school. It is my pleasure this morning to serve as moderator for today's webinar. It's also been a genuine pleasure to be a member of the DD Network team that created, no pun intended, Creating a Successful Path, a series of 6 webinars focused on employment and transition. If my last count is correct, we have had close to 600 participants join us for our webinars. So that's amazing. So thank you so much. If you've joined us for every single one, thank you. And if this is your first one here today, we appreciate your time this morning. So before we get into a little bit more, I wanted to do some ground rules. If you have a question, please use the chat, easiest way for us to monitor. And hopefully at the end, when we've got question and answers, we'll use that raised hand function, which is at the bottom of your bar. Most people are familiar with Zoom, but I always like to give a quick overview for those of you first time. So again, thank you. I know we've got more people joining us, and I do believe Jason and Michael can let people in, and thank you for doing that for me. Okay, so let's go on. So why are we talking about employment first this morning? Because changed thinking leads to changed public policy, and that's true for any issue. So instead of from assuming that people with disabilities need to be taken care of, they can't work, need constant supervision, are a burden in families, we need to discover that people with disabilities can be self-sufficient, can work and pay taxes, don't need constant supervision, and are valued family members and community members. Just a little background. 1.4 million adults in Arizona have a disability. That's 24% or 1 in 4 adults. Yet, only 22% of 46,000 individuals in the Division of Developmental Disability System are in integrated employment. The 2018 Community Survey one-year estimates for Arizona report that 173,000 people with disabilities are employed, 24,000 are unemployed. However, 250,000 are not in the labor force and not seeking work. The median earnings for people with disabilities is about 25,000 for males and 21,000 for females. In comparison, people with no disabilities report higher earnings, males at 37,000 and females at 30,000, which is, there's still a lot of disparity there. And so hopefully today we can talk about what can we do about that. Nationally, there are almost 40 million Americans who are living in poverty. People with disabilities experience the highest level of poverty, 24% of any subgroup in the United States, for 17 consecutive years. In 2014, the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Sonora USED, Vocational Rehabilitation, Institute for Human Development, the Arizona Center for Disability Law, Division of Developmental Disabilities, self-advocates, family members, and many others launched an Employment First initiative to work collaboratively on systems change and improve employment outcomes for people with disabilities. The assumptions and myths I mentioned previously are simply not true. As we hope this webinar series has shown, if you give a person with a disability the right tools and proper support, they can achieve goals such as competitive integrated employment. We ask that you take the information that you receive in these webinars and join our efforts to advance employment first, because there's still a lot of work to do. This includes being part of the legislative process and whatever other way you choose to get involved. We do not need to just talk about employment first as an idea. We need to implement it. And that's going to take all of us to do so. So far, there are too many individuals with disabilities at or below poverty line and not given the chance to realize the potential. So now I will introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is my colleague, Corey Lovato from the Arizona Center for Disability Law. Corey, he's our managing attorney, grew up in Colorado before moving to California for law school, then settling in Phoenix in 2016. He worked at a nonprofit serving low-income veterans before joining ACDL. Corey is passionate about using his law degree to make a difference for the underserved and underprivileged. When not working, Corey can be found at the gym or out exploring Phoenix. And I will just throw in that Corey is also a wonderful person to work with. Then our next presenter after Corey is Vanessa Zuber. Vanessa is the statewide director of employment services for United Cerebral Palsy of Southern Arizona. She oversees employment service programs for transition-age youth and adults with disabilities called Workability. Workability uses a holistic approach to assist the supported employment journey. Vanessa and her Workability team have established collaborations with multiple employers and community partners over the years and have placed over 250 people with disabilities into competitive employment. She believes collaborations and relationship building are the key to sustaining the future of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Vanessa is currently a founding board director and co-president of the Arizona Association of People Supporting Employment First, APSE chapter, and is on the professional panel of the advisory board of the Autism Society of America. She also has a brother on the spectrum and is proudly identifies as she, her, LGBTQ, and neurodivergent. And our last speaker this morning, Jason Sneed. He is with the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. He graduated from the University of Houston with a double major in political science and economics, and then attended the Arizona Summit Law School and graduated in 2016. He serves on the Phoenix Mayor's Commission for Disability Issues, Arizona APSE Board, and the Arizona Achieving a Better Life Experience, ABLE, Oversight Committee. He's a proud father to Sam and Jameson. Jason is happily married to Autumn and has cerebral palsy. He's passionate about disability issues and employment. Lastly, he is a certified sexuality educator. Like I mentioned previously, we will have the Q&A session after the presentation. We also have a survey. When you close out today's session, we ask you to complete the survey. We really would appreciate that and your honest feedback. So now I will pass this off to Corey. And lastly, if you don't need your cameras on, please turn them off and make sure that your mics are also off. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone else for being here. I'm excited to get started. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Jason. My part of this presentation is just to go over the history and future of a number of different laws and just the ways that people with disabilities have been employed. We can go next slide. So the introduction, the place to start is the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. This was introduced in 1938, part of the New Deal from FDR. And this was a big deal at the time because it introduced minimum wage for the first time, as well as a number of other protections. But for our purposes, minimum wage is the important thing. And this was a radical idea at the time. We sort of take it for granted now, but it was a big deal when it first passed. And one of the things that the proponents of the bill and the later law were concerned about were the employment of people with disabilities and how they would be able to enter the workforce competitively with a minimum wage. So to address those concerns, the FLSA contains what's called Section 14C, which allows for sub-minimum wage, basically less than minimum wage, to be paid to certain employees with disabilities. So what is it? You can define it first of all. It's designed to incentivize employment of people, and this is a quote from the law that came before the FLSA, but later became the FLSA, people whose earning capacity is limited because of age, physical or mental disability, or other infirmity. So the way that this works is that employers will file for a certificate with the Department of Labor that allows them to employ people with disabilities and pay a sub-minimum wage. The pay rate is supposed to be a commensurate wage rate. So it's calculated basically by the productivity of the individual with a disability, the employee with a disability, as compared to other similarly situated employees. It's worth noting that the employer measures the employee productivity and pays a rate proportional to that productivity. And it's supposed to be in comparison to other employees, again, who are doing the same type of jobs, the same kind of hours, same type of position, all that kind of stuff. But it's still going to be subjective, basically meaning that the employer decides how to measure productivity. The Department of Labor does have a role in oversight, but when it comes to actually like deciding what the wage would be, it's up to the individual employer. And what that usually looks like is, say you have a workplace where workers are building, you name it, widgets. They're building widgets. You have an individual who is not disabled and can build 10 widgets an hour. And then you have an individual who is disabled, who's participating in the sub-minimum wage program and is being paid, or I'm sorry, can produce, say, 8 widgets an hour. So according to this calculation, that the individual with the disability should be making about 80% of what the other non-disabled individual is making. Even if the non-disabled individual is being paid minimum wage, in that case, the individual with a disability would be getting paid 80% of minimum wage, whatever that would be. So this has to be reviewed every 6 months, or it's supposed to be reviewed. By it, I mean the wage rate that the employer is paying. And then the Department of Labor reviews the certificates, which again, allow the employers to pay sub-minimum wage every 1 or 2 years, depending on whether the particular type of employment is considered competitive or not. And if an employee ever has an issue with the pay rate, or they think that they're being treated unfairly, basically questions of abuse or mistake, they can petition the Department of Labor to review the compensation rate. All right, we can go next slide. So within these certificates and within section 14C, there is another, a specific type of work environment that's known as a sheltered workshop. I would imagine a number of people here are probably familiar with these, but these are work centers that offer employment, training, and rehabilitation services specifically to workers with disabilities. And these are often in isolation from non-disabled workers. So a sheltered workshop would be only people with disabilities, generally paying sub-minimum wage, and not integrated with non-disabled employees. These sheltered workshops are the most common holders of these certificates under section 14C. So to give you an example of how prevalent it is, nationwide, 84% of all of the certificates are held by sheltered workshops, and 94% of people with disabilities who work under section 14C are in sheltered workshops. So virtually everyone with a disability who is working sub-minimum wage is in a sheltered workshop. There's only 6% of people who are not. So sheltered workshops are really the one of the biggest areas where the certificates are used. You can go next slide, Jason. So the big question that this poses is, all right, well, is this scheme, section 14C, the best way to employ people with disabilities? And I want to take a little side note here and say that, sheltered workshops and the sub-minimum wage were not intended initially to be a bad thing at all. They were intended with, they came about with good intentions to try to get people with disabilities jobs and make them, get the skills to be able to enter the workforce. But that was in 1938, and the law has really undergone very little change since then. So in the past, it's almost been 100 years now. There have been a lot of different shifts culturally and within the law that have led a lot of people to take a second look at section 14C and say, I think there's probably a better way to do this. And to give you an example of how this is kind of, the writings on the wall at this point, both Republicans and Democrats have favored repealing Section 14C since 2016. So both the 2016 and 2020 Democratic National Convention and Republican National Convention. This was on both of the party platforms. This and the sky is blue are maybe the only two things that Democrats and Republicans agree on. So it's a bipartisan issue, very unusual. The two main proponents, the two main federal agencies that also support this are the National Council on Disability and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. They both favor repealing Section 14C and replacing it with something different. So we'll get to that in a minute. But worth noting that there's been a number of state and federal efforts at repealing this. The federal government has actually, or Congress, I guess I should say, has introduced 3 different bills since 2011 to repeal Section 14C. None have made it through into being a law. To be completely honest, this just isn't a super high priority for Congress. But all 3 of those bills had many co-sponsors, up to like 80 or 90, I think. And again, it's a bipartisan issue. It would seem that the future is going to be outside of Section 14C, and that we're going to be moving in a different direction. A couple of states have taken action as well. New Hampshire and Maryland have banned subminimum wages altogether, whereas Vermont did not get rid of subminimum wages, but did ban sheltered workshops. And all 3 of those states have followed up and tried to integrate their former employees of sheltered workshops into the workforce. And the outcomes have been, pretty positive for the most part for people with disabilities. So a couple of criticisms of Section 14C and sheltered workshops. Why are we looking at getting rid of it in the first place? The biggest reason, the overarching kind of principle, is probably this first point on here, which is that a lot of people who favor repealing and replacing Section 14C with something else say that it's built on antiquated principles, that it's a holdover from an era, again, 1938, when people with disabilities were not really part of mainstream society. They were often segregated, they were institutionalized. The idea that an employee with a disability would work alongside an employee without a disability was really a lot more foreign at that point. Another big reason is that, again, Section 14C sheltered workshop employees, one of the big goals was for those people to be able to get some kind of job skills and move on to competitive employment. And the data doesn't show that that really happens. Most people who work in sheltered workshops end up staying in sheltered workshops. And there's not a whole lot of movement from the sheltered workshop onto competitive employment, where the person may have an opportunity to say advance more or earn higher wages, or work with individuals who are not disabled and be a bit more integrated in the community. There have also been a number of laws that have been passed since 1938, most notably the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, which is similar to the ADA, actually came before it and applies to the federal government, and IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And that basically establishes special education and tries to get people with disabilities a good education in public schools, rather than, again, putting people with disabilities in institutions. There's also a Supreme Court ruling that's come out, Olmstead, just call it Olmstead rather than pronounce the entire thing. We'll get into that in a little bit in a couple of different slides, but it basically stands for the principle that people with disabilities should be integrated into society. They should be housed in like the least restrictive environment. And sheltered workshops seem to conflict with the principle in that. I want to take a side note here and say that I'm not saying that Section 14C or that the FLSA directly violates any of these laws or the Supreme Court ruling, although some people have made that argument. But I think when it comes to the principles and the sort of priorities that underlie those laws or that Supreme Court ruling, then it does seem to go against that. The other big thing, again, in the last 100 years, is that we have new technologies that have made employees with disabilities much more competitive. We'll, again, get into that in a little bit. Each one of these topics, I have some slides on coming up. So the biggest survey, I guess, that paints a pretty good picture of what the outcomes are for sheltered workshop employees versus integrated employment employees was done by Voc Rehab over a 20-year period. And it showed, the average wage when someone first started working, their average wage after 3 years, and what percentage of those workers had health insurance. And you can just see the comparison here. The sheltered workshop employees on the left started out at an average wage of $3. And then after 3 years, their average wage actually declined to $2.89. Whereas the integrated employment employees, much higher starting wage, $7.56. And then 3 years later, still saw a pretty substantial increase, about a 50% increase in pay. And again, 12% health insurance at sheltered workshop versus 59% of workers who had health insurance through integrated employment. So those are outcomes that we tend to like to see. So a couple of laws that have gone through that have been passed after the Fair Labor Standards Act. The big one is probably the ADA, and the Rehab Act, again, very similar to the ADA, so I'm putting that in here with it. But Title I of the ADA was specifically geared toward getting people with disabilities into the jobs market and into competitive employment. So that makes disability discrimination illegal in the workplace. It also allows people with disabilities to request reasonable accommodations at work. Reasonable accommodations are basically some type of change to a rule or policy that allows the individual to work the job competitively. It could be anything from, say, increased bathroom breaks, or a change in a slight modification to a schedule, having a service dog accompany you at work. There may be certain adaptive technologies or assistive technologies that could be useful for someone to perform their job. All of those are different kinds of reasonable accommodations that are allowed under the ADA. The Rehab Act, again, very similar law, but it just applies to the federal government. And both of these laws are aimed at increasing the employment opportunities for people with disabilities. That is unequivocally their goal. And then worth noting also that the ADA prohibits discrimination in most public settings. So think businesses, state and local government, any services that come from that. The ADA also prohibits that, and is worth mentioning here because that has an impact on a person with a disability's ability to go to school or to go out and shop, and again, just sort of be integrated into society. IDEA, another big one. This again covers education and special education. It's the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, and promotes the education of people with disabilities through special education programs. Again, we see this as a move away from having people with disabilities be more institutionalized and putting people with disabilities more into kind of mainstream society. Worth mentioning again that the ADA and the Rehab Act work hand in hand with this law. So say you have a public school that has a student with a disability who needs some kind of services or an IEP, that would be covered under IDEA. But let's say that student also uses a wheelchair to get around and get to class. It's the ADA that would come in and say that the school itself needs to be accessible so that the student can get into the school and go to class and everything like that. And the Rehab Act, anyone who's familiar with like a 504 plan for special education, which is sort of like an IEP, but like a baby IEP, I guess would be the best way to describe it. A little beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but again, that's the Rehab Act, and it very much contributes to people with disabilities in education. We go next slide. So Olmstead, the Supreme Court ruling that I had mentioned, most often this is cited for its what's called the integration mandate for people with disabilities. And this didn't deal directly with any kind of employment situation. It was actually two individuals who were in Georgia and their doctor said that they should be released into a less restrictive environment where they were living in the community. And the state of Georgia said, no, we're going to put them in an institution. It ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you need to put them in the least restrictive environment. You need to get these people out into the community as integrated as possible. And then just a couple of good quotes from that ruling: that the unjustified placement or retention of persons in institutions severely limiting the person's exposure to the outside community constitutes a form of discrimination based on disability prohibited by the ADA. Or then the second quote, individuals with disabilities had to be provided services in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of qualified individuals with disabilities. So again, you take the principle behind this, that people with disabilities should be integrated rather than segregated, and sheltered workshops would seem to go against that principle. We go next slide. So the other big thing, aside from different developments in the law and different laws that have passed to kind of shift not only the legal protections around people with disabilities at work, but also the sort of cultural perception of that, has been new technologies. Adaptive technology or mobility devices, those are big ones. So adaptive technology, a great example is like the JAWS screen reading software that many people who are blind use in order to use a computer. I mean, computers in general have made people far more productive and open the doors to a lot of different jobs for people with disabilities, since we're more about mental labor now than physical labor, as opposed to what the job market looked like in 1938. But an employee who's blind and has the JAWS software, as long as it works on the computer, can do pretty much whatever an able-bodied or a non-blind person, I guess I should say, would be able to do in that same circumstance. Service animals is another area that's just made remarkable strides. Service animals can do all kinds of new crazy things that just were not around in the 30s, and can allow people who may have a disability that would otherwise be a much greater, provide much greater difficulty in finding work, that those service animals can now allow that person to go find employment, keep employment, manage the disability or the symptoms of the disability much better. Mobility devices, another big one. Again, we're talking FDR's New Deal in 1938. So there aren't a whole lot of pictures of FDR in his wheelchair, but if you ever get a chance to see one of them, compare that chair to anything that's out on the market today. A person in a wheelchair in the 30s would have a very difficult time getting around because the chairs, the devices themselves are big and clunky and hard to get around. Whereas today, you have wheelchairs that can be made of titanium or carbon fiber or whatever, ultralight, much easier to transport, to see someone move themselves around in that. And that's just a wheelchair. I mean, you could think of any number of different devices that have gone this route. Prosthetic limbs, another great example. Those have come a long way and can allow someone with a prosthetic leg to really function just about the same as anyone with a non-prosthetic leg. You, in many cases, would never know the difference unless they're wearing shorts. Medical equipment is a big one that would allow someone, again, to go out and participate in employment, whether it's different medications, things like, I'm not sure what else would come to mind, a number of different medical equipment advances anyway. The medical field has come a long way since the 1930s, and a lot of those advances have allowed people with disabilities to, again, be able to go out, live full, productive, fulfilling lives, and go into the employment context and really compete with people who are not disabled. So if we're passing new laws, how do we do it? Say I've convinced you at this point that Section 14C is on its way out and that there are other protections here. So what's the alternative? First of all, the lessons that have kind of come out from the states that have repealed the Section 14 or banned subminimum wage are three main areas. One, that subminimum wage and sheltered workshops need to be phased out gradually. So don't just pull the plug. Don't just throw people out in the street. Maryland had a great way of doing this with their law, where they actually were the people, case managers and people running the sheltered workshops had to go and work with the people who were there, their employees, and develop a plan for what type of competitive employment they might be able to find. Basically follow through with them and see if they could get in there, map their strengths and weaknesses, all in an effort to make sure that those people were not just thrown out of their sheltered workshop and onto the street with no job. And then again, prioritize the integration of employees with disabilities. So have those employees out into the community, working jobs next to non-disabled individuals. And then the third big thing is that you need to address the concerns of people who favor keeping Section 14C. One of the big arguments against getting away from 14C is that if someone with a disability earns a certain amount of money, they may lose their SSI or SSDI, their Social Security income. And at that point, they may also lose access to a number of different services. So by earning more money, they may actually, have more concerns on that front. So those concerns those are legitimate. Those are legitimate concerns. Can't sweep those under the rug, and have to make sure that if a new law is being implemented, that it really is in the interest of the individuals who are working. That's the bottom line goal. Go next slide. All right. So the best or the outstanding movement now is toward competitive integrated employment rather than the Section 14 sheltered workshops. So what's competitive integrated employment? It's defined by the Workplace Innovation and Opportunity Act as having these 4 criteria. The pay is at or above minimum wage for similar duties, training, and experience as employees without disabilities. So basically the pay is comparable and the job is comparable to employees without disabilities. Second, same benefits as non-disabled employees who are in similar positions. So think like that health insurance disparity that was from that 20-year study. Some competitive integrated employment would seek to address that. Third, located where employees with and without disabilities interact. They work with each other. This is a great for integration generally with people with disabilities, and is great really for society in general to get people with disabilities out working to change a lot of stereotypes and let people know that just because a person has a disability, that doesn't mean that they can't be a productive worker, a productive member of society and hold a job. Would go a long way toward integrating, again, people with disabilities into the community. And then fourth, the other big issue that came with sheltered workshops is that most of the people who worked in those would stay in them long term. So to be presented with opportunities for advancement, similar to employees without disabilities, is another big part of it. That people with disabilities working in competitive integrated employment should have the opportunity to advance and move up in that job, which the sheltered workshops didn't seem to be. The data was that the sheltered workshops were not really providing a lot of opportunities for advancement. So what does this look like in practice for competitive integrated employment? Well, another big movement is called Employment First. And this is a national framework basically designed to change all of the different systems of employment that exist for people with disabilities to promote competitive integrated employment. So CIE, competitive integrated employment, is the goal. Employment First is the means. That's the way to get there. It's the gist of it is that publicly financed systems, so governments and government-funded projects or businesses are urged to align policies, regulatory guidance, and reimbursement structures to commit to competitive integrated employment as the priority option for employment of youths and youths and adults with significant disabilities. Go next slide. See what this looks like in Arizona, because fortunately, we have an Employment First executive order in 2017, signed by Governor Ducey, and it declares that state agencies must work to improve employment outcomes for people with disabilities. So in practice, this means that a number of different state agencies are partnering with private sector vendors, and in doing so, must make an effort to expand job opportunities to all Arizonans with disabilities. And by doing that, they want to adopt these employment first principles and practices. Jason will get into this a little bit more after my presentation here. I'm just sort of giving a brief interview of competitive integrated employment and employment first. But the general overview is just that it focuses on services and supports. So again, think of reasonable accommodations, assistive technologies, look for the strengths of an individual with a disability, let that person make an informed choice as to what job they'd like, go through supported decision-making and person-centered practices. Again, these are all These are big terms that have a long definition on their own. Jason will get into that a little bit more. But the bottom line kind of overarching goal here is to focus on the person. What can this person do to compete in the workplace and to be integrated in the workforce with non-disabled employees, rather than working in sheltered workshops where people with disabilities are sort of isolated away from other workers and earning sub-minimum wage. So with that being said, I can hand it off to Jason. I'm sorry, to Vanessa.
Thank you, Corey. As mentioned earlier, I'm Vanessa Zuber. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to be sharing some ways in which UCP's workability program supports competitive integrated employment. And I'm also going to be touching on what is APSE and why Employment First is important. And we'll also be talking a little bit about what our chapter is doing. So I'm really happy to be here. Next slide. I'd like to start off with a slide that covers, that kind of shows or represents different people working, getting support, learning, getting into exploration. And obviously disability looks very different. There's no one size fits all disability, which means, we have a lot of diverse needs or a lot of diverse skill sets. And our philosophy supports Employment First and is sort of the foundation for how we provide employment services. We have placed people into a myriad of jobs, not your typical types of jobs that you might see people placed into. We've made placements with the Tucson Medical Center, Tucson Electric Power, Truly Nolan, Tucson Unified School District, and we've also placed people in at Mod Pizza and AAA Landscaping and some website design businesses. So we really do believe we want to support people with disabilities who want to work and create win-win situations between job seekers and employers. Not only do we focus on Employment First principles, but we want to recognize people's abilities and capabilities, assume competence, promote informed choice and self-determination skills. You'll see a picture on here of a presentation we did a couple years ago on how self-determination plus employment equals success. It's very much the foundation for all of us, right, in trying to accomplish our goals. And looking at promoting the idea to our community, and this would be parents, this would be employers, this would be all the different schools that we partner with, that we want employment to be one of the expected outcomes for people with disabilities. Next slide. So some of the services that we provide, all of our services actually lead to competitive integrated employment. And we have two different kinds. We have our transition to employment classes, which is a DDD service. And we also have our ISC, which is individualized supported employment. Go ahead and click, Steve. One more time. There we go. For our VR services, we do pre-ETS, which is working with high school students. Keep going. And we have our job development and retention, which is the bulk of what we do, where we provide job coaching, we provide job development. And, this is where we're supporting both the member and the employer. Keep going. We also have supported education, which is also a VR service. We partner with multiple educational institutions, such as Pima Community College and the University of Arizona. And we work with the DRC, the ADR departments to support people on their journey into post-secondary, goals. And it's very exciting service. And then we also provide consulting services to our employers. And go ahead, Steve. We also do family mixers where we educate our families and community members. And we do a range of topics that supports competitive integrated employment ideas. We're actually going to do one in Yuma. And we are committed, very committed to providing customized and supported employment for all of our job seekers and employer partnerships. Go for it. One more thing about our services, a lot of people forget that we can grade services in our state. So, connecting our DDV services with our VR services really works well to provide a complementary group of supports for individuals. And even though we might not have the verbiage sometimes in those services, such as customized employment or the discovery, we can get very creative in how we support people into CIE, especially for people with significant barriers. Being involved in APSE was a no-brainer for us. We became connected as far back as 2015 because we share that same belief that everybody deserves access to equal employment opportunities, competitive and integrated. Go ahead, next slide. But what is APSE? The really cool thing about the Association of People Supporting Employment First is that they really truly are the voice of Employment First. And they have been the vocal or the voice of Employment First since the 80s. And back in the 80s and early 90s, the Department of Education had issued federal grants to more than 40 states to provide services for finding and maintaining jobs in community settings for people with disabilities, which was offering alternatives to the isolation and also economic exploitation of segregated or sheltered work settings. So this isn't really a new idea. It's been around for quite some time. And really what Employment First means, as Corey mentioned earlier, is the workforce should be the first and preferred options for individuals with disabilities. Simply put, Employment First means real jobs, real wages. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, keep going, sorry. Sorry, Steve. We have our little animations here. So what is our chapter doing? So the really interesting thing is APSE is in at least 40 states across the nation. So it is a national movement. And Arizona has its own chapter. And we have been around since 2017. And we're going to get into some of the ways in which we're providing and propelling Employment First. Go ahead, next slide. A lot of times we ask as a chapter, what are some of our guiding values as a chapter related to Employment First initiatives? Go ahead, click. So we have our access to real job. You just keep clicking. Everything relates to, access, equity, and inclusion into employment opportunities, and also recognizing how ableism and intersectionality plays a role in how we value and think about people with disabilities. It plays a role in equitable employment and transition to employment opportunities. So it's good for us to think about that as a society, but also as a community. Next slide. Does employment first make a difference? That would be our question, right? Does employment first make a difference? According to the DOL, Department of Labor, our participation rate for people with disabilities is about a third of that of people without disabilities. Keep clicking. And we still have low employment rates for people in the United States, with over 13 million adults of working age in the United States receiving disability benefits from Social Security. And as Corey had touched on earlier, people are afraid. They think that if I get a job and I'm working full time, you know, I'm not going to be able to qualify for benefits, or I'm going to lose my benefits, etc. But studies are coming out that relying on benefits actually keeps you in poverty. So does employment first make a difference? Yes, it does. It has continuously been shown that with assistance, accommodations, and encouragement, many people with disabilities can work successfully in the community, and that includes people with significant disabilities. And truly, it is the road out of poverty. Focusing our public resources on employment first, providing the assistance necessary to find and succeed in employment, is a road out of poverty. Dependence and isolation for individuals with disabilities will actually reduce. All right, so we're going to stay on this slide. Go ahead and click. I'm giving you a workout, Steve. APSE has determined that while the minimum wage, you know, may have been at one time valid and effective, because of the evolution and because of the disability rights and community employment movement, we have found that subminimum wage is no longer necessary. And really, the idea that sheltered work programs are not really integrated. They don't know the informed choice or advocacy idea of equitable inclusion into employment. So APSE recognizes the importance, you know, this is going to take time to make this shift. We recognize that. And we know that it's going to take a lot of efforts and systems change to make this happen. Go ahead, next slide. So a lot of times people ask, you know, how do we propel this idea of employment first? How do we start making these changes within the state of Arizona? And really, it truly takes a village. I mean, it's not something that one system can take on or one group of people can take on. You know, it has to happen with all of us. Systems change, you know, because employment first is a vision. You know, like what it says up here. It's an initiative and a movement. It is not an agency. It's not a program. All of us that are on the chapter that have been involved, I'm a member. I'm also a certified employment specialist through the association. All of us are volunteers. We're volunteering our time. Nobody gets paid. Arizona APSE is grassroots. So it's a bunch of stakeholders that are involved. Including the council. Sonoran, you said we have a lot of folks that participate. We all get together and we're trying to have these dialogues. We have people with disabilities involved, looking at how to change policy and practices, encouraging best practices with our provider agencies, and how do we get competitive and integrated employment moving. Next slide. All right, so here's some ideas that has been discussed in APSE, our local chapter, in these groups. You know, but looking at how do we create the systems change? How do we move forward? You know, focusing on outcomes and looking at that idea that employment should be one of the first and preferred options for people with disabilities. Phasing out sub-minimum wage over time, improving the overall quality of community employment, thinking about, you know, not placing people into sheltered work or sub-minimum jobs, you know, not using these programs as a post-secondary placement because we don't know what to do. Getting people into actual work opportunities, and no more issuing of 14C certificates. So the question I posed to the audience, and I know we have a bunch of stuff in the chat, what barriers do you see in accomplishing these changes? I'd be curious to hear what people think about that. Next slide. Okay, some of these things I mentioned. Thank you. Keep going. Yep, thank you. Okay, so just to summarize our chapter work, you know, we also look at trying to recruit members because this work does take a village. It takes a lot of us working together to make all these, you know, policy, legislation, actions, you know, any kind of conference, any kind of trainings that we do. So we try to recruit a lot of our APSE members in our communities, and we'll talk about that later. Looking at resource development, you know, we have an updated website. If you guys haven't seen it, I encourage you to go to it. It's incredible. It's www.azapse.org. I would get yourselves on there and check it out. Training, education, and employment first, and best practices for supported employment services and employers. So we're looking at, you know, a lot of people think that service providers focus solely on the job seeker, but really, if you're doing supported employment right, you're actually providing support to both the job seeker and the employer. So it should be both. We wear a lot of hats as employment providers. Communication and outreach through social media. That's another thing that APSE propels, is getting the messaging out there. Highlighting employment success stories, addressing policy and legislation related to employment first, sub-minimum wage, and 14C certificates, and developing plans to advocate and educate states, or our state, on employment first. We also are developing a concurrent resolution to work with legislatures on moving employment first into policy and practice for the state of Arizona. And then last but not least, we do our annual meeting every year, and that's where we invite the community to come in and learn about what we're doing, what we're up to. Sometimes we have topics that we share, and I'll talk a little bit about that later at the end. Next slide. Okay, I felt like I was moving at the speed of light, everybody, so thank you for your patience. Here is our contact info. We have our website. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about membership or you want to learn more. You can also visit the national website at apse.org. You can learn more about what's happening across the country. We have multiple social media handles, which you can check us out. There's a lot of cool stuff that we post. And then there's my information and UCP of Southern Arizona's website, and you can find information on workability on that website. I want to thank everybody for being here, and I'm going to pass it on now to Mr. Jason Sneed.
Thanks for saying, Corey. I'm going to talk about this employment first from the personal perspective. So here we go, really fast. All right, next slide.
Jason, I'm sorry. Jason, can you somehow get closer to a mic? It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit better, thank you.
I why employment first is important to me is because well, you can see the picture right there. Is because it helps me support my family right there. That's my two sons and my wife and myself. And that's I want to stress everybody has different reasons why employment first is important to them, but employment first allows me to make a wage to support my family so I can have a, you know, and make sure they have what they need and be part of the community that I'm part of, you know, and and be part of the workforce and earn a wage. So next slide. A little bit about how I got here. I'm going to start back from things that Corey was talking about with the IEPs and the Education Act and stuff like that. And just to preference this, I went to school in Texas, so the process here is a little bit different. But when I started school, but when I was in school, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and I in first grade I got a computer to write because I can't write on my own. So I use the computer, I use the touchscreen and different technologies and different adaptations that were able to receive. I was also, because of my IEP, able to attend normal classes. That includes, you know, going to being in band and different things and going on trips with them and, you know, and doing those kinds of things. Also, my family was very, you know, I was very involved in my family business, which is a restaurant, and we, and the concept of him to get employment was like, well, you either work, so get to work, and we need your help, and so, you know, I did whatever I had to do in the restaurant to make the restaurant work. It wasn't until I got out of high school and was looking to go to college that I applied to be all where I realized that there were some issues there because I wanted to I got accepted to several colleges and I wanted to go to college and I heard that you have to pay for it. As part of that process, you have to go through this assessment process, and they have me you know, do some different things like sort beads, do all those kinds of things. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Because and also take an IQ, also take different IQ tests or whatever it was. I, you know, I had some difficulties taking those tests because I didn't have the proper accommodations. Therefore, you know, I was able to retake the test with the proper accommodations, and my scores were better. And I originally went to college at University of Houston under the recommendation of several of my friends and people that I network with within the disability community. I want to stress that that's also important too, because they can help you navigate the system better, as well as figure out different ways for like you know, income. You know, as I said before, income was an issue for many folks and how to work with the systems. There is a website called DB 101 that goes through that, and I will put that in the chat. Also, for technology use, there's a website called AZTAP, and I'll put that in the chat as well. It allows you to rent technologies and stuff to see what's good for you, so you can use that one thing that my school did was, I went through several different technologies to make sure that I could use those things. Lastly, I just want to call for people's help. I know that Vanessa talked about AZ Athlete, which I am a member of as well. I'm part of the board there, and we just need your help in moving employment first forward. And whatever way you want to do that, there's several different ways to do that. So if you want to get in contact with us and talk about that, please do so. And that's it. I'm done. I'm going to pass it back to Natalie. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason. And appreciate you and your story. And we're just going to give like 2 to 3 minutes for any questions because we are right at time, but wanted to give the opportunity for anybody. There's been a very good chat going on, so thank you for that. But if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. And there will be a copy of the video of today's session on the DDPC website, and we'll be sending that out. And if you also would like a copy of the PowerPoint, please email, you can either email me or Mike Leba. And I'll put my email in the chat. Some of you may have had it for today's session. I don't think I'm seeing any hands here. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, we really appreciate your time this morning. We hope it's a really informative session. We encourage all of you to join the Association of People Supporting Employment First, APSE, and help us promote October's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And thank you, everyone, again, for joining us for this past 6 webinars. On behalf of the DD Network and the Arizona APSE chapter, we sincerely appreciate your attendance and participation. And again, please remember to fill out our survey. The link will show as soon as you close. And I will bid everybody a good day. Thank you so much. And thank you to our interpreters and our CART for their attendance today as well.
Hey, Natalie, you forgot to mention the save the date.
Oh, my apologies.
That's okay. Maybe we can send that out with
Yes, we will send that out.
Much.
Again, thank you.